Welcome to the podcast, Dennis. It's absolutely fantastic to have you on.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
So, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask all my guests. What is your money story?
Yes, thank you for starting with that. I think it's always really interesting to understand people's money stories, and it's a great way to start a conversation. My money story is that I spent 30 years working in financial services. I worked in banks and handling money and other people's money. And after 30 years, or a little bit after 30 years, I realized that I knew a lot about money and not very much about money in myself. So in many ways, I was financially secure in kind of the physical sense of financially secure, but not emotionally secure around money. I didn't know my money story. And so through various circumstances, which are essentially kind of leaving my corporate job of 30 years and looking to or moving to another country and trying to find another job and start a different life, I came across money coaching on a podcast. And it was that moment when you realize that in front of you is the answer to a question you've been asking for a long time, which is, what is my money story? Who am I? And so I started the process of money coaching. I became a money coach. That was about 6 years ago. And I started my own journey of understanding. And it started with that moment of realization that I had spent the whole of my life carrying around my father's money anxiety, and along with a lot of his other anxieties. And they were his. They were my subconscious inheritance. It was kind of a gift. And I didn't have to take it anymore. And that realization changed my life completely, because then I could see that I could understand it. I became aware of it. I understood its origins, and that gave me the path to releasing myself over time from my father's money anxiety. And I realized, so I'm 6 years down the line in this, and as you know, I've been training money coaches for a couple of years, and I'm still finding things out. So my money journey, my money story continues. And about 6 months ago, I had the realization that actually it went beyond anxiety. My father had a scarcity mentality that rippled out across the family. And I had embraced all the elements of that scarcity mentality, not just the money anxiety piece, not just the there won't be enough or there'll never be enough. There's also a part around that, which is when you look at yourself and wonder if you are enough, and you will be never enough. And then when you spend your life desperately hanging on to what you've got for fear that it will run out, you don't have room in your life for abundance, and you don't have room in your life for creation of a better self, but also just more in your life. And that realization around the scarcity mentality aspect of it made me realize that I needed to embrace abundance, for want of a better word, around myself, around what I was doing, around who I was, and around what I could create for myself and my family.
Yeah. And that is so important, I think, to understand. I coined a phrase last year that has had quite a big impact on some of my clients and drove them to become my clients when they heard me say on social media, as parents, we are the author of our children's money story. And for lots of people, that was almost, I think, the moment the penny dropped and they realized that, oh my God, my limiting beliefs, I know what they have done to me and for my life. And you're now telling me that they're going to do the same for my children's life. And I find it
Yes.
fascinating, as I know you do, that so little is understood generically by the population with regards to the impact that our relationship with money can have on our lives. that once you start to understand, once you can start to make that correlation and create that self-awareness, as exactly as you have done with regards to, I've inherited these unhelpful beliefs, attitudes, behaviors from one of my parents. I've now got to do something about it. If you hadn't become a money coach, how different do you think your life would potentially be now if you hadn't had the ability to create that self-awareness of that impact?
Well, I think I probably would be divorced by now, in simplistic terms, because amongst other things, our reactivity around money, our anxiety around money isn't, as you say, kept to yourself. It ripples out across the family. So when you understand reactivity around money, it also gives you an insight into reactivity around everything that you are challenged by and get defensive around. So as well as inheriting my father's money anxiety, I inherited his aggressive tone of voice, his Victorian parenting style, and just his his dislike of being challenged. And so yes, when you grow up with children, when you have children, I should say, then you're, I guess, what's interesting is that the parenting style you inherited almost by default becomes your parenting style. My father was born in 1919, which means that he's from another generation or generation and a half. And so his mother was born in the 1800s. So he really was inheriting a set of Victorian ideas around how children behave, how children talk to their parents. If I say jump, we all go, we used to say, if I drive off the cliff, we all go together. I'm like, no, 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 Dad, we're getting out of the car. But of course, that wasn't a discussion. And so in many ways, so with the money piece, I don't know in terms of kind of where I would have stood if you look at my personal balance sheet in pounds and pence. What I do know is that my communication, my ability to connect and make my family feel safe around me was in a really bad place. And people will only tolerate that for so long. So unless you can show up as a different person, unless you can show up as a kinder person, unless you can show up as somebody who makes the people in their life feel safe, they're going to feel unsafe, and at some point they may well leave if they have the choice to. So in many ways, the money coaching journey profoundly changed my relationship with my kids and my wife, and I am very, very eternally grateful for that, because it wasn't in a great place beforehand and it wasn't in control. So it wasn't in a place where I knew what was going on and how I could change it. And so I knew I wasn't, great. I was shouty, I was angry, I was reactive. And my coping mechanism for that was just to kind of shut down in terms of like, I'm just not going to be reactive. In other words, I'm not going to react. But that doesn't work, because somewhere down the line, something's always going to trigger you. And if you have anxiety, that is going to pop up at some point, because it's very, very hardwired. When you learn to have a different response to a situation, when whatever used to challenge you before, you can absorb and go, oh, wow, that's really interesting. Can you tell me a bit more about that? Or as opposed to no with everything. Everything with my father was no. No, 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 we don't have money for that. We can't do this. We can't do that. Everything is like, oh, okay, let's look at that. So then the other person feels heard, understood, even if we come to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
And what this boils down to is a really interesting thing that I read recently. It's around kind of, was it safe to ask for what you needed in childhood? And that extends way beyond childhood, as you know. And there's two interesting elements to this. One is my need reasonable? And can it be satisfied? And they're different. Now, when you respond to everybody with no, they're going to interpret it as potentially as me asking for something is not reasonable, as opposed to, I'd love to help you out. We don't have the money right now. Or that's a really great idea. if I give you £5 and you say £5 will go and buy that thing that you want. And so that level of reactivity versus response, or I should say in the positive side of it would be response versus reactivity, allows the other person to stay safe in that space, and it doesn't push them away continuously. And so that as a core approach to life, as a core approach, as a life skill, is what underlies that, I think, is an appreciation of what's going on, but also feeling enough in yourself. And if I'm enough in myself, then I don't automatically get defensive when I'm challenged, or when somebody asks for something that would normally make me reactive around it, or says something. And that is one of my core understandings recently, is that if I'm enough in myself, I don't mind being challenged. Being challenged means, oh, that's really interesting. Why don't you tell me more about that? As opposed to trying to shut the other person down, or just attacking them because they've made me feel slightly threatened.
And you have done an amazing job on the journey that you've been on, because I've only known you for about 18 months. But if I had to describe the Dennis that I know and have experienced, I would say that you are very measured, you are very non-reactive, you are very calming. You've certainly calmed me down in different situations. And I would not know the man that you previously described how you were as the man that's been presented to me on several occasions. Your level of self-awareness, but also your deep desire to keep learning. And it's
Mm.
your deep desire to keep learning that has really encouraged my desire over the last 18 months to be much more exploratory with regards to what I continue to learn. So first of all, just to say, I just want to acknowledge that I see that in you, but to ask you the question, because I think so few people understand when we talk about, you know, our relationship with money, when we talk about money coaching, there is so little understanding generally about it. You know, I know my friends will kind of go, I've got no idea what Leslie does. She talks about money, but I've got to be honest with you.
She
I've
talks
got
about money, isn't that rude?
exactly.
I don't want to talk about money.
I've got no idea what she really does.
Nothing to see here.
Exactly. What drives you to do what you do now?
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your acknowledgement. It's more than 18 months. It's 6 years, and it's there's, you know, there's much more ahead. So thank you for acknowledging that. Teaching people money coaching has been profoundly changing for me, as well as being a money coach. And I hope that, you know, came across in the work that we did together. And
Absolutely.
so part of that is about not being scared to put yourself in a space where someone's going to ask you a question you might not know the answer to. And so within that, I think one of my earliest learnings around this is that asking questions is a sign of strength, not weakness. Or maybe it's just not a sign of weakness. The answer, I'm really sorry, I don't know, let me check, and I'll come back to you, is totally acceptable. It's totally fine if you feel fine in yourself. It's also a core part of growing, which is, I don't know. Daniel Kahneman has this lovely expression where or had, unfortunately passed away. He goes, I love being wrong because it's the only time I know I'm learning something.
That's a very wise thing to say. Yeah.
It's very wise. He was a
Yeah.
very wise and very humble man. And I'm not saying I've managed to absorb that at the core level, but it really puts into context what a commitment to lifelong learning is all about, is to put yourself into places where people will challenge you. And if you're wrong, you get to learn. And if you're right, it's also okay. So there's a level of equanimity around the outcome that is always win-win.
Yeah.
If I'm wrong, I learn. And if I'm right, or at least no one challenges me, that's also okay. I'm not obsessed about the outcome. If I know that the outcome is going to be positive for me because I've had a really interesting conversation, then that is really helpful. So there's this concept of finite versus infinite games. Have you come across this?
No.
They think the guy's name is James Cass. So the concept is of this: what is the object of a game? Now, is it to win, or is it to enjoy playing the game? Because a finite game is about how I win the argument. An infinite game is how much I'm enjoying. I want the game to continue.
I enjoy winning. Does that work?
So, well, the idea is that when you look at everything from the lens of competition, you're always trying to win. And so that shuts down the game. Whereas an infinite game is where you enjoy the pleasure of playing the game and you're not fixated on the outcome. It's the game that's more important than the outcome. Now, some people are better at it than others. I'm not a great loser. I get very competitive, but I do understand the concept when you apply it to a kind of lifelong learning or an engagement process with people, which is people will come back to you with stuff that you don't like. Learning to deal with that, learning to accept that, and learning to engage with it positively is life-changing. So when you look at your relationship with money, and if you asked me 7 years ago about my relationship with money, I would have no idea what you were talking about.
Yeah.
So I understand that we've come a long way in that space.
Absolutely.
And that, like, I think beautifully, it's beginning to percolate into the public consciousness. But generally, it's not out there yet. If you go back 100 years ago to Chariots of Fire, remember Chariots of Fire?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, that's 1920s, I think. Chariots of Fire, at that period in time, people felt that the upper class body was superior to the lower class body, and it was unsporting to train because you were naturally better and naturally gifted. So in the film, the American guy, I think, has a trainer who has to hide because it's not considered good, good sport to hide. Now, obviously, in the last 100 years, we've come a long way in terms of our understanding of physiology, in terms of our understanding of training, and also, the mental side of peak performance in the physical and even, in the corporate space. So I'm very positive that the conversation around money and the relationship with money, which is really more about how it makes us feel and how we feel about it, can be elevated from the kind of dark areas that it currently sits in. Because it's really important. We use it every single day, and we can't avoid it. And so it's important to understand how money works. That doesn't make money the most important thing. There are many more things that are more important than money, but because you're going to use it every day, it's important you know how it works. And you can't do that unless you have a conversation with it, which kind of gets conversation about it, which kind of gets back to the parental thing, where if you say to most people, would you like to talk about your money issues, they'll reverse out the room. But if you say to them, would you like to understand how to raise financially capable children or teach your children to be good with money, they're all ears all of a sudden. So what I'd like to touch on a little bit is the relationship with money piece, because it's not often understood, and people get it, when they have heard of it, they get it confused with financial literacy. And financial literacy is kind of very much kind of talking to the analytical part of the brain.
Absolutely. Nuts and bolts of how money actually operates in this world.
This is what you do. I'm not knocking financial literacy. I think it's really, really important. But our money, our relationship with money isn't stored in the logical part of the brain. It's stored in the emotional part of the brain and the reptilian part of the brain. And so we've got to understand that in order to understand the relationship with money, you need to understand it's got three parts, which is, how do I feel about myself? How do I feel about money? And how do I feel about money and myself? And how I feel about myself is the cornerstone of my relationship with anything. I mean, it could be food, it could be exercise, it could be work, it could be learning. How I feel about myself, which is kind of like, if we take learning as an interesting example, if you were at school and you were one of the 70% who didn't have a great learning experience, you're not going to feel great about learning. Just because you don't absorb information in the way the educational system presents it to you, you're going to feel not great about yourself and not great about learning and not great about learning in yourself. Because the messages you got, you're thick, you're slow, why don't you get this, and then you have this other situation, schools where it's very obvious that the person with the answers is the smart one, not the person with the questions. So guess what happens? You don't ask questions, because if the teacher doesn't mock you, the people behind you will.
Absolutely.
So you can come out of school with a really unhealthy relationship with learning, which is obviously very problematic because you have to learn for the rest of your life. So when I look at that and transpose the word learning with money, then how I feel about myself is really important.
Key, absolutely.
Because I need to feel I'm competent. I need to have confidence in my knowledge and decision-making processes. I need to feel I have a level of control over my future, the concept of agency. I need to take ownership of my outcomes. And my self-worth does not depend on my net worth or my possessions. So I am enough in myself. Now, that doesn't mean I can't get better. It doesn't mean I can't learn things. It doesn't mean it's not an excuse for complacency.
No.
It just means at a core level, I am enough. Now, when I feel good about money, then money is a tool to achieve well-being. It just runs through our lives. It's not the work of the devil or the root of all evil or, the only thing that matters. Or something we don't talk about. It's not unknown, it's not confusing, it's important to us, as we said, to understand it, but it's not the most important thing.
It's a tool, isn't it,
And
that we need to know how to use effectively. Yeah.
Before we had money, we had other ways of organizing things. And when I feel good about money and myself, then I understand how money works. Thinking about money doesn't make me feel anxious or ashamed or guilty, inadequate. And I'm comfortable having open money conversations. I'm also comfortable asking for what I'm worth. And I'm comfortable engaging with the financial system. And so this healthy relationship with money that I've just kind of sketched out into 3 bits is really important. Because if you think about money as a person in your life, and you're living with someone who every day, because we use money every day, who makes you feel ashamed or anxious or guilty or regretful, or all of those, or both of those, and you swing from one side to the other, that is not just hard, that is miserable.
Absolutely.
When you think of money as a person that you live with, and it's driving a whole set of emotions around you that aren't great, yeah, that's really, really hard. I have a huge amount of compassion for people stuck in that space because I was in it too. And I'm not saying I'm fully out, but I do understand what I need to do and how I need to be to manage my reactivity, to manage my understanding at my relationship with money. And it really starts with self-awareness and then self-compassion, because we don't choose to be anxious or ashamed or guilty, any of those things. And if money is making us feel that way, we can change that.
And I think
my message to everybody is, you don't have to live with this stuff. As a money coach, and you're a money coach and a money confidence coach, we can help people understand it.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I've been coaching teenagers in schools for the last 3 or so years, and often get asked the question, and the coaching that I did was a combination of financial literacy, but money mindset included, because I firmly believe, I started this analogy that it's a little bit like doing your theory driving test and not having the confidence to get in the car to take the lessons or take the test. So financial literacy gives you the practical knowledge around money. But if you don't have money confidence, then it's irrelevant. You're not going to do anything with that knowledge. And going back to what you said about parents, because again, the question that I often get asked is, Well, how do I talk to my children about money? I don't know enough about it to feel I can have a confident conversation. And I always say, ask them what they want to know. Remember what you wanted to know when you were their age, and exactly as you said, and say to them, I may not have all the answers, but let's go and find out together. Because I think as
Yeah,
adults, we can get to a stage where we haven't asked the questions and we then feel it's too late. I should know by now. So I can't put my
cool.
hand up and say, I don't understand what an ISA is, or I don't know what a SIP is, or I don't understand what inflation really is. They feel it's too late. So to let yourself off the hook and say, "Look, I may not know all the answers." Well, first of all, it demonstrates to your children that you are honest. You don't pretend that to be that parent that knows everything, because no parent does. But it also gives your child the assurance that they don't have to know everything. Exactly as you said, we're giving them permission to ask questions. And in school, that permission to ask questions can get dampered down for so many reasons.
Yeah, I love everything you just said. It's exactly the same message that I give when I talk to parents around this. Never shut down money conversations. And if you want the one thing to say in any situation, as a parent, when you're challenged and someone says, how much money do we have, or what's our house worth, or what's a SIP, or whatever it is, the answer to all of those questions is, wow, that's really interesting. What made you ask that? And then you'll get some context on it. And then you can say, listen, I don't know that myself, but why don't we go and find out together? So many positive messages about money, positive messages about asking, positive messages about being, it's okay not to know, all those things that you've mentioned. And if we can, as parents, and not just around money, respond in a way that doesn't leave the other person shut down, as it, then we create a really healthy relationship with that person around whatever it is they want to ask. And also it's so much better to have that conversation when they're asking it, not when you're trying to do financial literacy 101 or budgeting 101
Yeah.
in the 3 months before they leave and go to college or wherever it is, and go, well, we'll sit down, we'll have the money talk. Like,
Yeah.
no, when your child came to you, they were open for learning. They came to you with a question. So don't duck it. I know it's hard if you don't know, if you might feel inadequate, or maybe you've got your own money issues, or maybe you're actually really struggling financially and you've got shame and guilt around that. Don't put that on the child. Their minds are open for learning. They've got a question. Now's the best time to have that conversation, even if you don't know the answer yourself. Let's go and look it up. Martin Lewis, Zoopla. There are plenty of money and pension service. There are plenty of websites that are neutral and are just information providers in this space. And hey, I think most when I talk to parents, do money talks with parents, are like, oh wow, I've learned something today. So you're always going to learn something yourself if you're open to the learning process. And that comes back to the earlier parts of our conversation, where I'm hopefully very open to the learning process. So if someone comes back to me with something I don't know, I'm like, great, let's go and find it out. I'm not trapped in my own defensiveness, because I don't mind what I don't know.
There's an opportunity to learn.
So my message, it's an opportunity to learn. And
Yeah.
it sounds so simple, and I hope it doesn't sound preachy at all. But we get trapped. It's very easy to get trapped into the space of I need to know the answer, or I should know the answer. What will they think if I don't? But I know what happens when you shut down money conversations, because you make that child feel that money can't be talked about, or it's evil, or it's wrong, or it's whatever. And guess what that's going to do to their curiosity? Is it going to shut it down? No. Where are they going to go to learn about money? They're going to go to the internet. They're going to, and their mates and TikTok.
Yeah, exactly.
And we all know where that is.
Absolutely. And then
So
that
I'm
was
very passionate about it.
absolutely. And
You
that
can see
that
from
yeah, sorry. Our signal is slightly breaking up. That's so I can't see when you're stopping because the signal is keeping you moving basically. So sorry for interrupting you. So
no problem at all. So I'm carry on.
okay, what is though for you, what would be the one thing you wished you'd known sooner about your relationship with money?
It's a really interesting question. Um, I think it would have been really helpful to know that anxiety was driving my decision making process. And what that meant was that I was always trying to hang on to what I had, as opposed to thinking about how can I grow this. It also, um, because part of the underlying root of my relationship with money, so there's a lot of messaging around we never waste money, and but it was also around kind of lack of self-worth. It also stopped me from, it kept me small to stay safe. So I think what, if you kind of unpack it, the most important thing I could have learned was that was that actually I had a relationship with money and I needed to be conscious and aware of it, because you can't change anything unless you have an awareness of it. And so what I would hope is that open money conversations around, you don't have to think that way, or why do you, or is that how open money conversations uh, around would be a way to bring greater awareness to people about, actually this is what is going on. You've inherited this along with all your other views about life and the universe and how families work from your childhood environment. Some bits you've absorbed subconsciously, some bits you've made pacts with yourself that when I grow up, I'm never going to be like that. I'm never going to do that. And unfortunately, most of us find ourselves doing that. And because the parent we resent the most, we've said, I'm never going to be like, it's really hard to recognize that we have taken on those things. We're like, I'm never going to do that. But you find yourself, a lot of us find ourselves doing it. Some people go to the opposite extreme. And some people manage to find, some happy space in the middle. But there's a lack of consciousness and lack of awareness around it, because the learning process itself is subconscious. It's powerful, it's deep rooted, it's subconscious, which means it sits in there and drives our lives. And as Jung has said, if you don't make the if you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will drive your life, and you will call it fate.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, very, very true.
I do wonder whether, how much of this is possible to absorb at a younger age. But certainly if in schools we could teach people around self-awareness or around healthy self-regulation, then some of this might be kind of things that 25-year-olds, normal 25-year-olds could absorb, as opposed to 55-year-olds where we're going, oh, I've done all of this. Now, why am I'm a lot more curious about my behavior at 55 than I was at 25.
Yeah.
So
But
if
I
we can get
think
curious around that earlier
absolutely,
on in life, then that would be really helpful.
absolutely. But I think it can be very, very appropriate and applicable to be having these conversations with teenagers as long as it's made relevant to them. And I think the relevancy comes along the lines of, for example, talking to your friends, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, with regards to, well, how are we going to do money? We're going out for coffee on a weekly basis. How are we going to pay for it individually? Are we going to take it in turns to pay? How are we going to ensure that when I borrow £5 from you, I'm going to give it back to you, and vice versa. And I think it's opening up how connected self-worth and self-confidence is with our relationship with money. I know my little boy the other day, I say little, he's 15. He said to me, Mum, I'm going to, on behalf of my tutor group, I'm going to buy some flowers for our teacher. But I'm not going to ask them for money. I said, why? Why are you not going to ask the school for money? Oh, well, it's only going to be £10. And I said, yes, Sam, it's only £10. But unless you're valuing that £10, then actually you're placing no value on it for yourself, but either for your friends whose names you're going to put onto that card from them when it's actually from you. So in order to value your money, which is an example of valuing you, then you have got to say to your friends, I'm buying these flowers, it's £2 each, £1 each, whatever it's going to be. So I think it does take understanding that money can be you giving away your power, or it can be you taking power away from other people as well. And understanding that in a context of being a teenager, I think can be helpful as long as it's situational to them and not talking about necessarily pensions and mortgages at age 12, 15.
Sure. Well, you're also talking about having a level of consciousness around what you're actually doing. So in the example that you raised, it's actually okay to say it's £10. I'm going to get £5 from my friends and put £5 in for myself.
Yeah.
If you wanted to make a gesture, it's what you're trying to raise is a level of consciousness around this. And if the desire to pay for himself is driven by a discomfort around asking for money from his mates, then that's something you need to address at an early age, because a lot of people sit with that. They're like, oh, I'm going to buy the first round, or they're looking, they're driven by the discomfort of engaging with the process of asking for money for themselves or whatever it is. That is driving them to avoid that conversation. And that then at some point that breeds resentment, because over time people will take advantage of that knowingly or unknowingly. So it's okay to ask for money in that particular case. And if you want to make a grand gesture and say, okay, you know what, here's £5 from my 5 mates, and I put another £5 in, you're welcome to do that, but do it consciously and
Exactly.
not have it driven by a subconscious process, or what people generally bump up against around money and most things is the discomfort. So of doing it differently, asking for money or whatever it is, or even paying for it, right? Oh, I'm not going to do it now, I'll pay for it later. There's this trap of kind of like, I'm going to pay for it. I don't like paying my bills, so I'm going to pay for it at the very last minute. And then you forget, and then you go overdrawn, and then you do this, you do that. So what is driving your behavior. When you look at your discomfort, that's a message. So if your foot hurt, Leslie, you'd like go, oh, that's interesting information about my foot. I should probably stop running on it, or I should go and see a doctor about it. But we understand the messages from kind of physical pain in that sense. But emotional pain and discomfort we tend to ignore, because like, shove it away, it's not going near that. But they're all really important messages. And I think what's really important for children to understand, or anyone to understand, is like, that's information. That's telling you something's not quite right. So if you
Absolutely.
ignore it, it's not going to go away. It might go under the radar for a bit. It's going to pop back up again. So understand it, listen to it, feel safe in yourself. Or if you don't feel safe in yourself, feel safe that to go to it with someone else who can say, that's totally normal. I get that. Tell me a little bit more about how that feels. And maybe you could think about it this way. And we don't teach this.
No.
It's so sad we don't teach this.
Yeah.
We and we pathologize discomfort. Well, I'll take a pill for that, or this, or that, the other, and that takes you to another space where you never address what's going on, and so you can't really get on top of it and change your response to it.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
So well done for having
Yeah.
a conversation, because it's really important that we go, oh, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? Well, I'm careful around why questions. Well, that looks really generous. What's driving that process for you? What are you thinking? What's your thinking process around that? Well, that sounds really
Absolutely.
generous. Have you thought about asking for your friends? Do you feel a bit icky about asking? Would you know, are you like just gonna, I'll pay the bill. You know what? I don't want to split it. It's fine. It's on me, right?
Yeah.
And then, people who don't want to pay are like, oh, great, Leslie's got the
Exactly.
bill. No
Yeah.
problem at all. I go there.
Exactly.
So
Absolutely.
Leslie's son's got the bill. So yeah, have that conversation. And I know it's hard. It's hard. So if you're kind of looking at that first date thing, and you're like, what you're trying to guess is what is it that the other person would like to hear so that I don't look like I'm mean because I want to split it, or I don't want to, if I offer to pay for it, is that insulting to them and their financial independence? So we're trying to play this guessing game about what is the best outcome I can hope, and how do I not offend the other person?
Yeah.
And how do you do that? Well, you have a conversation and you go, look, this is, we our first date or whatever it is. I don't really know very much about how you think about money. So could you mind, telling me what would be a good outcome for you? What would make you feel comfortable? I'm happy to pay, I'm happy to split it. What would you prefer? And how would you like to do this going on? Who has that conversation? Nobody, right? And then 30 years later, you're still arguing about money because you haven't ever sat down and gone,
Had the conversation.
let's talk about this,
Yeah.
you know?
Absolutely.
So the
Absolutely.
archetypes, our upbringings have clashed over all this period of time
No,
because
very
we are
true.
trapped in. I don't
Yeah.
know what's going on, and but I do know I'm right and you're wrong,
Yeah.
and I do know there's always pain. But it is a really interesting point when you look at it from the first conversation where we are like hormones are raging, all sorts of things going. No one's going to sit down and go, tell me about your relationship with money and how would you like to do this? How, because we're trying to impress the other person. And I'm not saying it has to be a first date conversation, but actually it's a really interesting point when you look at it because everything stretches out from that point
Exactly.
to, I'm not saying money is important to discuss on the first date, but it's a really interesting point for saying to someone, um, how would you like me to handle
How
this?
should we do this? Exactly. Yeah.
How should we do this? Absolutely. The we thing is better. Sorry. How
Yeah.
would I like to do this? How should we do this? That is a much better approach. Thank you, Leslie.
And one last question. Where would you like to see money coaching going?
Well, we have coaches for anything we want to get better at in life. And so I'd like people to feel that the thing that runs through their lives that they really need to get on top of, the coaching is available to them around that. And I'm not saying I'm not saying we need money coaches in schools. I just would like the dialogue around money at the societal level to be much more open and transparent. And so if you ask me around money coaching, I'd like people to go, sure, from like, I didn't realize there was such a thing as a money coach to, yeah, I've been talking to my money coach about some of the issues I've had recently, and they've been really helpful to me. Would you like me to recommend them to you? So at a level where it's in the same space as anything I want to get better at and understand and work through in an environment with someone who makes me feel safe and doesn't judge me around what I've done. When you go and if you have a tennis lesson, the guy doesn't, or the coach doesn't laugh at you and go, God, that's a backhand. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. They don't do that. They go, wow, okay, where would you like to go? Show me your backhand, show me your forehand, and let's do some practices. All right. We understand that process. So what I'd like where I'd like to see money coaching is where people are shown that it's available to them. There's no judgment around whether you have it or not, but actually it could be really helpful and possibly life-changing for them to develop a healthy relationship with money and themselves, because money is so tied up into our self-worth that it's always going to trickle into ourselves. So it's money and ourselves. And then we can all have open, honest, supportive conversations around this thing that we need to use every day.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So how can people connect with you, Dennis?
They can find me at cambridgemoneycoaching.uk, and you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Dennis Harhalakis on LinkedIn. And those are my two main portals. So please reach out. There's plenty of podcasts I've been on, including this wonderful podcast, if you want to understand a little bit more about how I think. And I've got plenty of resources on my website for people who want to understand a little bit more about the money in their lives.
Brilliant. And all those details will be in the show notes so people can easily connect with you. Thank you very much for your time today. I have loved our conversation, as I love all our conversations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Leslie. I've loved talking to you too, and thank you for such great conversation.
My pleasure.